My name is Sahira, and I'm here to teach you the beautiful art of belly dance. Hey folks, so I get a lot of questions from zillers, especially new zillers, as to how are you supposed to sew your elastics on your zills. So I wanted to make a video to walk you through the process nice and easy so that you can sew your elastics on your zills so that they are comfortable, easy to play, and hopefully will last you a very long time. So interestingly enough, I actually just recently started sewing my zill elastics completely differently from the way I sewed them for like the first 19 or so years of my belly dance career. I'd always sewn them one way. I'd had great luck with it, but then I saw the light and I started doing it differently with input from other zillers and practical experience with all the different sets of zills that I own, because I own quite a few of them. So today I'm going to show you the way I'm currently sewing my zills. Not to say that that won't change at some point, but I'm really happy with this. So first, let me show you what you are going to need. Sewing your zill elastics is a fairly easy task, even if you are not into sewing. I promise you, it is not difficult. You can do it, and you only need a handful of things. So let's take a look. You're going to need a needle and thread. Just any old needle will do. I use something small since the elastics are small. Typically, I'll use a thread in the same color as the elastic that I am using on my zills, but I'm going to use white today so that you can really see it up against the black of my zill elastic. You're going to need, of course, some finger cymbals, and then you're going to need the elastic. Let's take a second to talk about this because I've used a couple of different kinds of elastic in the course of sewing zills on or sewing elastics on many kinds of zills, and I definitely have a preference. So I'm going to show you two here, the two that I find to be most common. This is called a braided elastic. So you can see the very vertical stripes that are happening in this elastic. This is a braided elastic. This is what I often get when I purchase a pair of zills, will be a braided elastic. And then this one is a knitted elastic. So you can see how it has a little bit more of a crisscross pattern in it. And this is called a knitted elastic. I have to admit, I'm a big fan of the knitted elastic. It has a little bit less give, a little bit less elasticity, right? This one, look at how much that one stretches. And then check out this one. This one doesn't stretch nearly as much. I am sort of a wild finger cymbal player. I really put my zills through the ringer, and I want them to stay really tight on my fingers most of the time. So because of the style with which I typically play, I find it to be most useful to have a knitted elastic and something that's going to maintain like a really good firm hold on my finger. I also find that it lasts me longer. I think because it's less elastic, it tends to not wear out quite as quickly as the braided elastic. Either will work, either will totally work. And especially if you are looking to have a little bit more wiggle in your finger cymbals, if you're doing a more sort of musician style of playing or more sagat style of playing, you might want a little bit more wiggle. And I find that the braided elastic is better for that. Whatever you do, be sure that you don't use anything like lingerie elastic or anything that's way too stretchy, or you'll find it's just not going to hold onto your fingers well enough. So let's talk for just a second about why I sew my zill elastics the way that I do. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, and they're all fine and well and good. I'm just excited if you get the safety pins off your zills and finally put the sewing into the elastics. For many, many years, I sewed my elastics on the underside. So I basically pulled the two sides of the elastic through to the underside of the zill, and then I sewed them together here flat on one another. And then once they were sewn and I cut this really short, I would then pull the elastic through onto the finger side of the cymbal, and I would end up with just this tiny little tag on the inside of my finger cymbal. I would cut it as small as possible, and for the most part, it worked great. And a lot of my cymbals are still sewn this way. But now I've switched to another way because this little tab ends up getting in the way depending on the shape of my zill and what it is that I'm trying to do. So especially sounds like the tick and sometimes the talk, anything where I'm trying to use this inside edge of my zill to connect with something deep inside here, it was a problem. And so I've started sewing my zills a little bit differently, which is actually, it ends up being a lot easier to sew the elastics on. And so I'm going to show you how to do that now. So what we're going to do today is we're actually going to sew the elastic on the top side of the zill. So it's kind of the same idea, but the tab is now going to be on the top side of the zill instead of on the underside, so that we end up with the elastic completely flush on the inside edge of the zill or the inside bell. That way it doesn't create any interference with any of your sounds with any of your fabulous zill playing. So what you want to do is you want to take your piece of elastic. I've already cut mine, but you can measure yours to your finger size as you do this. And I'm going to thread it through from the bottom on both sides, right? So I'm taking it here from the inside of the bell. I'm threading it through. You want to make sure that it's nice and tight and that elastic fits all the way across the slot. If it's an elastic that didn't come with your zill, you want to measure to make sure that it's at least the size of the slot. I think mine is just a tiny bit bigger, so I have to pull it through pretty tightly. And this creates a nice firm grip for my elastic on my zills. So I'm pulling it through all the way through on both sides. And so this is what I end up with on the bottom side, is nothing to interfere with my zill playing, which makes me so happy. So now I have here on the top side the part that I'm going to sew. So let's say I'm going to make this one for my middle finger. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take my finger, put it in there. I'm going to use my other hand to grab the elastic, and I'm going to pull it pretty tight because I do want this. I want it to be a little snug when I put it on. I don't want it to be the exact size of my finger. I want my finger to actually stretch the elastic as it goes in. So I take it, I pinch it, and then basically like check out, where that pinch is being held. I slip my finger off, and then I go in. And once I get that very first stitch in there, I know I've marked where this needs to go, right? Once you do this, you're home free. That's the hardest part, honestly. You're going to just start weaving in and out with your thread. I'm going to close the edges by doing a couple of stitches in here around, right? So essentially what I'm doing is I'm closing off this edge as I sew. And then once I've done a couple loops around to grab both edges of that elastic, I'm just going to zigzag in and out through the elastic. So let's go ahead and do that together now. So I've made it to the other side of my zill. Or to the other side of the elastic, I end up looping back around to close those elastics together and then going back over to the other side. So let's go ahead and do that together now. I'm going to change my camera angle so you can see this from a different perspective. Once I make it back to the end, I go ahead and just loop it and knot it off. I figure that a few like extra stitches now will hopefully prevent these from busting on me early and make the elastics last as long as possible. So I take the time to put a little extra love and attention into this. So I'm going to go ahead and loop it through, and I end up with this circle of elastic. So I'm going to pull through, and then my thread is apparently going to get all wound up in circles. So I'm going to unwind this so you can see the circle here. And I'm going to pull my, my needle through that to knot it off. And maybe I'll do it one more time just because I don't want them to come flying off while I'm dancing. So I'll just close it up one more time. And there you have it. It's not necessarily pretty, but it's going to do the job. And especially if I had used black thread, you can barely see it. So once I'm done with that, I'm going to go ahead and cut off the extra thread, both from the beginning and from the end. And then I'm going to cut along my stitches there. So you can see my stitches front and back. I'm going to go ahead and cut along that, making sure that I'm cutting on the outside and not on the inside, and undo all my great work, right? So these are not the best scissors, but let's go ahead and cut this. So now I've left a teeny tiny little tag. Now, for me personally, like this little tag on the top, I think it's really ugly. It bothers me. So what I do now is I pull from the other side. I'm going to pull the elastic through a little bit. It's a little bit of a tricky struggle, but then I'm going to push this tab down so it's flush with the top of the bell of my zill. So it's not sticking up on the top, but it's laying down on the side. And then I'm going to pull the circle of elastic back up so that this, you can see that tab with all my white stitching on it, is going to lay flat on the zill instead of sticking straight up into the sky. And then I'm going to put my finger in it and make sure it's a really good fit and it doesn't fall off. So that's about how I like to wear mine. And then you'll find if for some reason you accidentally did it not quite tight enough, you'll just go in there, flip your stitch back to the top and stitch a little bit further down to make it a little bit tighter. One little trick, I always do my thumb zills first because I typically tend to accidentally sew them too tight. And so when I accidentally sew my thumb zill too tight, it ends up being my middle finger zill, and then I can just retry the thumb. So that's typically how I do it. And that's it. So then you have it and it's nice and tight and you don't have to worry about having anything here on the inside of your finger cymbal to get in the way when you play, yet you still don't have like kind of the ugly tabs sticking out of the top. So I hope this was useful to you. So now go sew those elastics on your zills and happy zilling.